Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Nancy Horowitz. I'm the director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's International Holocaust Remembrance Day. A warm welcome to our live stream audience as well. Over the years, we've presented quite a variety of programs. Rob Leiken and I have been doing this program for about 18 years, best count. We've had speakers on a Nazi spy ring in Boston. I'll let that sink in for a minute. And the legacies of that spy ring. We had a program on Primo Levi, a film about his Holocaust testimony, survival in Auschwitz. And we had one of the directors and producers of Ken Burns' intense and very important documentary, America and the Holocaust. These programs have been really diverse, but they've all had some connecting threads. And one of the main connecting threads for me is the question of dehumanization. How does it start? I think we know how it ends, but how does it start? What are the warning signs? How does dehumanization work? Dehumanization leads to violence in today's troubled world. We've already seen this. Hatred against Jews is on the rise precipitously, and also hatred towards other groups is on the rise as well. And our question is, how do we prevent more hatred, more violence? What is the best path forward? Today we're commemorating the Holocaust together at this event, but we're also commemorating how we think about it, how we can understand it, and what we can learn from it. Education about prejudice is crucial. The Wiesel Center is responding to this rise in anti-Semitism by developing a program in anti-Semitism studies. We give students access to information, discussion. We discuss a world in which old hostilities and hatreds, and as I said, not only against Jews, have reemerged. Students on campus need to feel safe and supported, and we need to teach them. Our responsibility is to teach them about our history, our shared history, their history, and about their challenges and our challenges. Transgenerational memories of trauma can be easily reactivated and have been activated by recent events. Tonight we are discussing a question of generational conscience as well as a generational loss. Our program about the music dedicated to the children who perished in the Shoah represents an important part of the artistic legacies that have lived on due to the efforts of the Terezín Music Foundation. The music that you will both hear and hear about represents a piece of this loss. L'Ador V'Ador, from generation to generation, musical voices that represent those lost children. Their loss is our loss, and they deserve representation, memory, our care, and our thoughts about them. Thank you. One more thing, deep thanks. So my thanks go to AJC New England and especially Rob Leiken, with whom I've worked for, as we said, about maybe 18 years now presenting programs. He's wonderful to work together. I've learned a lot from him and from the AJC staff, and I really, really appreciate all of their efforts. And my thanks go as well to the Elie Wiesel Center staff, in particular Teresa Cooney and Jenna Riedel, who do so much to make all of our events possible. Now, Rob did not want me to introduce him. He said, oh, you don't have to introduce me, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because he's done so much really important work at the AJC and before. So he's been the director of AJC New England since 2008. He's a child of parents who survived Hitler's Europe. He grew up with a deeply rooted regard for the opportunity that American democracy affords Jews and other vulnerable minorities. Throughout his career, he's been a passionate defender of civil rights, an advocate in the fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, and a vocal proponent of a just and secure future for Israel and its neighbors. And he began his career working with Holocaust survivors in New York. Please join me in welcoming Rob Leiken.
Thank you, Nancy. Not to spend the rest of the evening praising each other, but working with Nancy and the staff of the Elie Wiesel Center is really an annual joy. dynamic, smart, thoughtful, caring, all the things I'd say. Nancy really is, for me, a tremendous honor and opportunity to be able to work together. I'm happy to be able to announce that we were joined today by several dignitaries. First, Consul General of Japan, Sachihiro Tashihaki. Thank you so much for joining us. The Consul General of Portugal, Tiago, I always get your pronounce your name, but I'm going to try. Arujo. Okay. I will get it eventually. We're also very happy to have Matt Wong here representing the Canadian Consul. And my good friend Marek Luzhnowski-Las, who's the former honorary consul from Poland. Very happy to have you here with us today. I hope I am not missing anybody. I want to, one of the things, Nancy talked about the kind of programming we've done. And part of the reason we do this kind of programming is because we're trying to remember. We're also creating memory. But one of the things that I've always struggled with is the challenge that comes. We have all kinds of different perspectives on the very difficult history that we call the Shoah. We talk about the people who lost. We talk about the memories, the families, the complex events that surrounded this. Each of these pieces is an effort to not only remember, but to create memory. And the problem that I've always run into is this. We can try as hard as we want, but it's very hard to get near. It's very hard to put yourself in that place. It's very hard to have the sense of what those moments were like, what those periods were like. I want to share a story for you that sort of illuminated this for me more. Like a few months ago, we took a family trip, and we went to Leipzig, which is where both my parents were from. Leipzig is a beautiful city. My parents were fortunate to be able to leave, and neither of them ended up in camps. Some of our family was lost, some of it wasn't. But they eventually came here to the United States, and we're ever grateful for the opportunity to live here. We wanted to go back. My adult children wanted to see where their parents had grown up, where their grandparents had grown up. And so we went. We were joined by some family, cousins from Paris, and we all went there, and we toured around the city. And as I said, it's a beautiful city. One of the things we did is we visited the homes where my parents grew up. In front of my mother's home are 4 bronze plaques about this big. You'll find these all over Europe and in Germany. And they're called stumbling stones, or Stolpersteine. And they had 4 of them in front of that building where my parents grew up, indicating with the names of my grandparents, my mother, and her sister. When we approached, my sons saw that they were tarnished, and they immediately knelt down to start scrubbing them. And I was sort of moved by that, and was watching them. And suddenly I looked up, and my wife seemed to be in conversation with a very elderly woman. And she was somewhat agitated and talking in German. And my wife didn't speak German, and she suddenly, my wife, not knowing what to do, pointed to the stones and then pointed to me and said, "Mutter, mother." And the woman burst out crying. She stood, sobbed for a moment, and then she looked at us and she walked away. In that moment, I felt the past and the present were connected. I imagined, I have no idea what the woman actually thought or why she was crying, but I imagined that here was some contact with the past that is usually inaccessible. It is that quality that makes tonight so special. Because there are few things that can really connect us to the past in an authentic way. But music can do that. Stories can do that. And that's something that Mark Ludwig offers through his work, that magical combination of factors that eclipse facts, that eclipse long histories, that eclipse ideas, and have the capacity to connect us to a past, to a history, and to memories and make them vivid and real. Mark Ludwig is a Boston Symphony Orchestra member emeritus and the founding director of the Terezín Music Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and advancing the legacy of music and art created by victims of the Holocaust. An internationally recognized Fulbright scholar and leading authority in Holocaust music, Mr. Ludwig has performed and lectured worldwide, sharing the enduring lessons of resilience and creativity born from this history. Through his recordings, concerts, and educational programs, he promotes tolerance and supports humanitarian initiatives across North and South America, Europe, Africa, Bosnia, Darfur, and Tibet. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Ludwig.
In memory of the more than 1.5 million Jewish children murdered in the Shoah, this program, Lost Promise, bears witness through music. The works you will hear tonight are by 4 composers whose lives were bound to children, their own, and the young lives they encountered in the Terezín concentration camp. These pieces come from a time when their voices were just beginning to be heard, when their gifts were just being recognized, and when futures could still be imagined. The silencing of their creativity, alongside the destruction of so many young lives, speaks of a promise never fulfilled, a loss beyond measure. Tonight, we listen in remembrance of the lost promise. The first of these inspiring voices was the Czech composer Pavel Haas. In the 1920s, the newly established Czechoslovak Republic was home to 3 towering musical figures, Smetana, Dvorak, and Janacek. Pavel Haas was widely regarded as Janacek's most gifted pupil and natural successor. By the mid-1930s, he was a respected composer of classical, film, and theatrical music, but his professional and personal life was abruptly shattered by the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Under the Nuremberg racial laws, marriages between Jews and non-Jews were forbidden. To protect his non-Jewish wife Sonia and their daughter from persecution and deportation, Haas divorced her. On December 2nd, 1941, he was deported to Terezín, where separation from his family and the brutal conditions took a devastating physical and psychological toll. This poster announces the Terezín concert that premiered Haas's 4 songs on Chinese poetry for baritone and piano, his final masterpiece and perhaps his most personal work. Fellow prisoner Victor Ullmann wrote that Haas's songs were, quote, full of life and relevance. Once heard, one can no longer do without them. Let us briefly hear a portion of that final song, but first look at the lyrics. The poem, as you see, it unfolds in restless images of nature, swaying bamboo, shifting moonlight, into the flickering Milky Way, before arriving at a single aching thought, I am thinking when we will meet again. In this first excerpt you will hear, Haas opens with a restless chromatic piano line, a musical portrait of a mind that cannot rest, filled with anxiety and foreboding, the familiar torment of a sleepless night. The restless music returns, then suddenly breaks into a moment of childlike simplicity before that final plea, I am thinking of when we will meet again. The singer then abandons words entirely, ending instead with an anxious, wordless tra-la-la. As both a parent and artist, this feels like a message, a musical time capsule intended for Haas's daughter. There is another work connecting Haas to his child. We step back now to 1935, the year of his daughter's birth, when Haas composed his suite for piano. Influenced by his mentor, Leos Janáček, the music alternates between percussive intensity and quiet inwardness, with subtle folk inflections from Haas's Moravian roots. Written at a time when his promise was being recognized, the suite offers a glimpse of a creative voice still unfolding, one whose future would be tragically cut short. Yoko Hagino will perform 3 selected movements from this suite. I wasn't expecting this, but I thought I should add something about Pablo Haas that would be of particular interest to the Consul General of Japan. So, Pablo Haas in 1944, during his incarceration in Terezín, wrote a string chamber orchestra piece called Suite. It's a fantastic piece. During my early research, I have the score in my hands, and I come back to Boston, and I meet with Seiji Ozawa. Okay, so I was also a member of the Boston Symphony at that time, but I had known Seiji for most of my life, all right? So he was more than just my boss, okay, all right? But I show him the score, and he looks at this. I'll never forget, I was in his dressing room up in Symphony Hall, and he's looking, and I tell him the story about the person who conducted it. So the person, talk about 6 degrees of separation. The person who conducted in Terezín that piece was a person who later became the music director in Toronto. And this person then was succeeded by Seiji. So Seiji immediately got very emotional in the connection. He also was emotionally moved by the piece, and as a result, the Boston Symphony, we gave the Symphony Hall premiere, then we took it to Carnegie Hall, and we took it on the United States tour with the Boston Symphony. And Seiji was a very big part of the beginning of my championing this music and my research, and he provided a lot of support to give me the time I needed to research and record this. So I wanted to share that with you. I think that's something very special. Yeah. So in these 2 photos, taken in November 1991, I'm with Carol Berman. I've aged a little bit, I think, right? But the baritone, he was the baritone who premiered Pablo Haas's 4 songs on Chinese poetry in Terezín. And we had just performed there in Terezín, marking the 50th anniversary of the first transport. So in subsequent meetings, Carol Berman shared with me Pablo Haas's final moments in Auschwitz. During selection before Josef Mengele, a sudden coughing fit sealed Haas's fate. This is Victor Ullmann, and it is September 13th, 1924, and in this photo, he's attending the 50th birthday celebration of his mentor, Arnold Schoenberg. This photograph captures a moment of great promise, a gifted pianist, composer, and conductor flourishing within Schoenberg's Viennese circle. By the mid-1930s, Ullmann had achieved major success, receiving the prestigious Hertzke Award twice, first for an opera and then an orchestral work. That trajectory ended with the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia and the enforcement of the racial laws. Desperate to save his family, Ullmann sought visas to the United States and the United Kingdom. These were his children, Maximilian, Felicia, and Johannes. In 1939, Johannes and Felicia were sent on a Kindertransport to the UK. Maximilian, quarantined with measles, could not join them. For the children and their parents, this marked the beginning of an unimaginable journey of separation and trauma. Johannes and Felicia were separated soon after arriving in the UK. They later learned that their parents and brother had been murdered in Auschwitz. Johannes was institutionalized, heavily medicated, and subjected to insulin shock therapy. He remained institutionalized until his death in 2010. Felicia was adopted. The siblings were reunited only once, when Johannes attended her funeral in 2004. In September of 1942, Ullmann was deported to Terezín with his first and third ex-wives, along with his son Maximilian. In a cruel irony, Ullmann, born in an Austro-Hungarian garrison town, would later spend the final 2 years of his life in another former garrison town, now converted into the Terezín concentration camp. In Terezín, Ullmann became a central cultural figure, conducting, lecturing, and organizing concerts. He also wrote a series of detailed concert critiques, revealing a remarkably rich cultural life within the camp. He wrote about stagings of Karma, Tosca, and Die Fledermaus, among others. He described instrumental and vocal recitals, as well as choral and chamber music performances. His attention to detail, whether in repertoire selection or in the virtuosity and interpretive skill of the performers, was always tempered by an awareness of the extreme conditions under which these musicians worked. Beneath these rich cultural offerings ran a constant undercurrent of anxiety. And yet, during his 25 months in Terezín, Ullmann composed 23 works. He wrote, quote, "Terezín, where anything connected to the muses stands in utter contrast to the surroundings." Ullmann suffered deeply from the loss of close friends, relatives, and most poignantly from separation from his children. In the final months of his life, he composed his 7th piano sonata, dedicating it to Felicia, Johannes, and Maximilian. The final movement, Variations in Fugue on a Hebrew theme, draws on Rachel, a Hebrew song popular with the prisoners in Terezín. Through its variations, Ullmann weaves powerful historical references. There's the Hussite battle hymn, "Ye who are warriors of God," a symbol of Czech resistance, a Lutheran chorale, and an homage to Bach. Together, these form a statement of spiritual and cultural resistance. Yoko will now perform the theme and variations. In his essay, Goethe in the Ghetto, Ullmann wrote, "By no means did we sit on the banks of the waters of Babylon. Our endeavors with respect to art were commensurate with our will to live." This epic movement that you just heard stands as a musical testament to Ullmann's credo and to his children. In a program memorializing the children who perished in the Shoah, I feel compelled to include the story of Friedel Dicker Brandeis. Friedel was an Austrian-born painter, architect, and educator. She trained at and later taught at the renowned Bauhaus in Weimar. Friedel and her husband Paul were deported to Terezín on December 17, 1942. Upon arrival, prisoners were permitted to bring no more than 50 kilos of belongings, while most chose clothing or personal necessities. Friedel made a radical choice. She packed art supplies, not only for herself, but for the children she knew would soon arrive deeply traumatized by the appalling conditions of the camp. In Terezín, children were separated from their parents, compounding fear, loss, and confusion. Though Friedel and Paul were childless, the children of Terezín came to see Friedel as both mentor and surrogate mother. She integrated Bauhaus principles, especially an aesthetic of empathy, into her teaching. In one lecture in Terezín, she described her work as a way to, quote, unlock and preserve the creative spirit, to stimulate fantasy and imagination, and to strengthen the children's ability to endure. A pioneer of what we now call art therapy, Friedel understood art as a vital therapeutic tool for survival. Working with extremely limited materials, she challenged her students to explore multiple forms of expression: collage, watercolor, and drawing, each a pathway into a deep reservoir of their emotions. A flower vase on a windowsill or a simple child's portrait became an opportunity to connect with inner life. Art as a portal to the soul. While working in the camp's cultural administration, Friedel came into contact with many musicians and artists. In fact, 2 decades earlier, as an art student, she had studied harmony with Arnold Schoenberg. There, she formed a close friendship with a fellow student, Victor Ullmann. In 1944, while imprisoned in Terezín, Ullmann dedicated a song to her. A similarly profound bond existed between Friedel and the multi-talented artist Ilse Weber. In the 1930s, Ilse produced programs for Czech radio, writing poems, stories, and songs for children. In many ways, her work anticipated what we now recognize as children's educational broadcasting, like Sesame Street. During the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, Ilse and her husband lived with their 2 sons, Hanuš and Tommy. In 1939, they were able to place Hanuš on a Kindertransport to Sweden, saving his life. Ilse and her remaining family were deported to Terezín in early 1942. While serving as a nurse in the children's infirmary, she continued to write poetry and set many of her poems to music. Songs such as I Wander Through Theresienstadt captured the immense suffering of both children and adults, while Kleines Wiegenlied offered comfort and reassurance. Friedel and Ilse ultimately shared tragically similar fates. On October 6, 1944, Friedel's husband was placed on a transport to Auschwitz. She voluntarily joined him, along with 60 of her students. All were sent directly to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. That same month, Ilse's husband was selected for transport. Refusing to be separated from her family, she chose to accompany him, along with many of the children she had cared for. They too were murdered upon arrival. One of Ilse's final songs, "And the Rain Falls," was written for her surviving son, Hanush. Before her deportation, Friedel hid thousands of her students' artworks in suitcases. After the war, these works were recovered and are now preserved at the Jewish Museum in Prague. Although most of Friedel's Terezín artwork was unsigned, she insisted every child must sign their work with name and age, a powerful affirmation of identity, of presence, of existence, a quiet declaration, I was here. The songs you're about to hear stand as a testament to the selfless devotion of Friedel and Ilse.
Gott selbst hat uns getrennt, mein Kind, du sollst nicht Leid und Elend sehen, so's nicht auf einigen Gassen gehen. Und der Regen rinnt und der Regen rinnt, hast du mich schon vergessen, Kind? Die Nacht Christus Ghetto, so schwarz und stumm, schlaf Kind und vergessen alles ringsum, schmieg fest dein Köpfchen in meinen Arm, beim Mutterschlaf sich wohlig und warm. Schlaf über Nacht, kann vieles geschehen. Über Nacht kann alle Kummer vergehen. Mein Kind, du sollst sein, einst wenn du erwachst, ist der Friede gekommen über Nacht.
Thank you, Jessica and Yoko. That was so touching. We close with Erwin Schulhoff. Among the most promising and versatile musical talents of the early 20th century, Schulhoff twice won the prestigious Mendelssohn Prize for Composition and Piano Performance. During World War I, Schulhoff was wounded on the Russian front and later imprisoned in an Italian prisoner of war camp. The suffering he witnessed profoundly reshaped both his music and his political convictions. He later declared, quote, "Music is the ultimate vehicle of revolution and freedom." The years of 1921 to 32 were among Schulhoff's most prolific. During this period, he absorbed and transformed a wide range of influences: jazz, Dadaism, Expressionism, and Neoclassicism. For this evening, I've selected two works from this remarkable period. The first is Ostinato for solo piano, subtitled Merry Piano Pieces for Large and Small Children, and he dedicated to my little son, Petra. It is a tender series of musical scenes from his son's earliest years. Yoko will now perform selections from Ostinato. In a letter to his friend and fellow composer, Alban Berg, Schulhoff wrote, "I am boundlessly fond of jazz and nightclub dancing. So much so, I acquire phenomenal inspiration for my work. Jazz frees my soul in music." As a composer, Schulhoff was a musical sponge, absorbing and transforming diverse genres into a voice unmistakably his own. His Hot Sonata, jazz for alto, saxophone, and piano, is infused with jazz and colored by the French impressionistic hues of Ravel and Debussy. It reveals the full richness of Schulhoff's imagination. Philippe Stadlin and Yoko Hagino will now perform his Hot Sonata. Wow. We heard the promise of a profoundly versatile creative force. The decade that followed would be devastating. Trapped in occupied Prague in 1941, Shoah, an ardent communist, had secured Soviet citizenship for his family in hopes of escape. Those hopes were crushed with the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. Carrying a Soviet passport, Shoah was immediately arrested. A Czech Jew, a communist, and a Nazi-labeled degenerate composer, his identity in music sealed his fate. In June 1942, Shoah and his son Petr were deported to the Wolfsburg labor camp. Shoah died there just 2 months later. In his final days, he was working on his unfinished Freedom Symphony. This drawing was made by Petr, depicting his father on his deathbed. After holding his dying father in his arms, Petr was forced to dig his grave. Rob mentioned being close to history. This is the drawing, the actual drawing. Imagine a son spends his last moments with his father. He draws this. Bob, you talked about being near to history. This is as close as you can get, physically, visually, emotionally. Think of the loss of talent, the devastation. You look at the paper, the fragility of the paper, the fragility of the moment. So it's a reminder. Things like this, but the music that speaks to us. There's stories that speak to us as well. We have to bear witness. We have to remember. But to really do that, we have to think about also the world we live in today. Do we bear witness to what goes on today? That is our responsibility. It's our duty. Not only to remember, but to be aware of the injustices that are in our world as well. So we want to close the program with Rabbi Jessica Katemeyer leading us in Eli Eli. Thank you.
Please join me. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol ve'hayam, rishu shel hamayim, barak hashamayim, tfilat adam, hachol ve'hayam, rishu shel hamayim, barak hashamayim, tfilat adam.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, joining together in a community to remember and cherish the memories of the past and be guided in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark, and our wonderful musicians for making this possible. Really quite incredibly moving. outside.